A moment of distraction. It was one of those rare, perfect mornings. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a gentle warmth over the neighborhood, and the birds chirped merrily in the background. The kind of day where everything felt just right, and for a brief moment, life seemed to slow down. The air had a crispness that hinted at the coming of a new season, and Lisa couldn't help but smile as she watched her son, Mark, play in the front yard. The backyard was fenced in, a small space for her little boy to roam and explore, while she kept a watchful eye from the porch. Mark loved his toys, especially the little rubber ball he often kicked and rolled across the grass. Today was no different. He was crawling around happily, his small hands reaching for the ball every time it rolled away, his giggles filling the air as he played. Lisa felt a warm, comforting sense of peace watching him, knowing that for the moment, everything was fine. She sat on the porch, her phone in hand, scanning through messages as she enjoyed the quiet of the day. She had a few minutes of downtime, just enough to catch up on a message from her friend. It had been a long week, and with her husband working late, these small moments of solitude were a luxury. Lisa looked down at her phone, quickly reading through the message, the sound of Mark's laughter still echoing softly in the background. But in that split second, in that brief moment of distraction, everything changed. She looked up again, expecting to see Mark sitting happily where she had last seen him. But there was no sign of him. Her heart skipped a beat. She scanned the yard frantically, her breath catching in her throat. The ball he had been playing with was rolling slowly down the driveway. But where was Mark? Panic began to grip her chest. She stood up quickly, her mind racing as she called his name. "Mark, Mark," she shouted, her voice trembling with anxiety. No answer. The wind seemed to pick up, rustling the leaves and making the world feel even more distant. She ran toward the gate, her hands shaking as she flung it open. Her feet pounded the pavement as she rushed down the street, calling for him. But it felt like the world was closing in. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Where had he gone? Every corner she turned, every door she knocked on. No one had seen him. Her pulse raced, and her vision blurred as panic took over. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. She had only taken her eyes off him for a second. A single moment, and her world felt like it was crumbling around her. Her heart pounded louder in her chest as she ran back toward the driveway. That's when she saw it. Mark's little ball, now on the other side of the road. It had rolled across the pavement, heading straight toward the busy highway that ran just beyond their neighborhood. The sound of the traffic was deafening now, filling her ears with a rush of noise. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. No, 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 no. Her body moved on its own, instinctively, even though her mind screamed at her to stop. She didn't even know what she was doing, only that she had to get to him, had to get to her baby before anything terrible could happen. Her legs carried her forward, but her mind was clouded with fear, each step feeling like an eternity. She could see the cars speeding down the highway, oblivious to the tiny figure now crawling dangerously toward the edge of the road. Her stomach twisted in agony as she followed the line of traffic, her eyes locked on the small, vulnerable figure of Mark, barely a few feet away from the rushing vehicles. Her throat went dry as she screamed out in desperation. "Stop! Someone! Please stop!" But the cars didn't slow down. They continued on, roaring past her, deaf to her cries. Her legs refused to move any faster, frozen in place by the overwhelming sense of terror. The sound of her own voice, now hoarse from screaming, seemed to fade into the cacophony of the busy road. Then, out of the corner of her eye, something white flashed, something big, something fast. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to see a dog, an enormous white Labrador, springing out from the side of the road, running straight toward Mark. It wasn't possible. The dog was charging through the traffic, ignoring the honking horns, the screeching tires, the speeding cars. It was as if the world had stopped for this moment, and only the dog mattered. Lisa's mind couldn't process it at first. But then, just as Mark neared the road's edge, the dog reached him. The world seemed to slow down as Lisa's heart pounded against her chest. The dog leaped into the path of the oncoming traffic, its body crashing into Mark just as a car sped by. The impact was swift and brutal, but the dog had acted without hesitation, shoving the baby out of harm's way. There was a screech of brakes, followed by a sickening thud. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she watched the dog crumple to the pavement, its body now lying motionless in front of a speeding car. Everything went still. Her vision swam, and for a moment, she couldn't tell what was real anymore. The cars continued to rush by, but it all felt distant. Her body moved on instinct, and before she even realized what she was doing, she was rushing toward her son. The only thing that mattered now was getting to him, holding him, knowing that he was okay. Mark was terrified, his small body trembling as he lay on the asphalt, but he was alive. The white Labrador lay next to him, motionless, its head resting on the ground. Her heart shattered as she knelt beside her son, pulling him into her arms and pressing him to her chest, feeling his tiny body shiver against her. The world came back into focus as people rushed out of their cars, some running toward Mark, others toward the dog. Lisa barely registered their movements as she clutched her son tighter, her face pressed into his soft hair. "Thank you, she whispered over and over, tears streaming down her face. But as she looked over at the dog, lying still in the street, a sense of dread washed over her. She knew what had happened. This dog had saved her son, and now it was fighting for its life. The love, the sacrifice, the unspoken bond. It was all too much. All at once, Lisa realized that she had witnessed something truly extraordinary. A life was saved that day, not just Mark's, but the dog's as well. And it was only the beginning of a remarkable journey. The heart-stopping rescue. The air around Lisa felt thick, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Time had slowed, but everything was happening so fast. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the rhythm erratic as she watched her son, her precious Mark, crawling toward certain danger. Her feet felt like they were glued to the pavement, and no matter how hard she tried, her body seemed incapable of moving quickly enough to save him. Mark was just a few inches away from the highway. The roar of the traffic deafened her, and for a moment, she was paralyzed with dread, her mind filled with a single, terrifying thought. What if I can't get to him in time? The sound of the cars speeding by was relentless, and the asphalt, hot under the midday sun, seemed to stretch on forever between Lisa and her child. Her eyes locked on Mark's tiny figure. He was so small, so innocent, his soft giggles still echoing faintly in her memory from just moments ago. Now he was in the middle of the street, his tiny hands moving in desperation as he crawled further, completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. Lisa could feel her heart rising in her throat as the distance between them seemed to grow, even though she was only a few feet away. In that terrifying moment, her instincts took over. She screamed again, but her voice felt lost in the wind. Her legs finally moved, but they were unsteady, like they couldn't carry her fast enough. She was running now, desperate, her breaths ragged and panicked. She could see Mark's little body, his striped onesie so small against the dark, cracked road. The cars were coming faster, each passing second bringing her closer to the edge of hysteria. She reached out, but the sound of the tires screeching against the pavement made her stomach lurch. "Mark!" She cried again, her voice breaking as she stretched her arms out, helplessly, as if trying to reach him through the air. Just as she was about to reach the edge of the road, her eyes flicked to the side. Something moved. A flash of white. The movement was quick, almost too fast for her to process, but it was there, unmistakable. A massive white figure bounded out of nowhere, ignoring the rush of cars and the constant danger. A dog, no, it was a Labrador, was charging toward Mark. The sight stopped Lisa in her tracks. The dog wasn't running away from the traffic. No, it was charging right toward Mark. Her heart skipped a beat as the dog's enormous form flashed through the space between Lisa and the road, its body moving with a determination she had never seen before. In that fraction of a second, as the world blurred around her, everything seemed to fall silent. Lisa's mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation, but there was no time. There was only the dog, the hero. The Labrador's powerful legs pumped furiously, and without hesitation, it reached Mark just as a speeding car came hurtling toward them both. In one swift motion, the dog leaped forward, pushing Mark with its body. The child was knocked aside, tumbling gently onto the road, but out of the path of the oncoming vehicle. The dog, however, didn't get out of the way in time. It collided with the car's front bumper. The screech of the tires as the car tried to stop. The loud thud of impact. It was all too much. Lisa's blood ran cold, and she froze, not knowing what to do. Her vision blurred with panic, her feet still unable to move. But then, time seemed to snap back into focus. The world moved again, though it felt slower, as if the universe was holding its breath. The cars continued to rush by, but this time, Lisa didn't see them. She saw Mark. Her baby was lying on the pavement, terrified but unharmed, his little body curled up as if he had instinctively protected himself. The dog lay beside him, motionless, a few feet away from the car, as though it had taken the full force of the impact. Lisa's legs finally responded, and she sprinted toward her son. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she lifted him into her arms. "Mark," she whispered over and over, checking him for injuries. He was crying now, his tiny body shaking, but there were no bruises, no cuts. He was alive. He was okay. The dog had shielded him. Tears flooded Lisa's eyes as she clutched her son to her chest, overwhelmed by the sheer force of what had just happened. She could barely process it. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and relief. As she held him, her eyes fell on the dog. The white Labrador lay motionless on the road. And for a moment, Lisa thought the worst. Her heart twisted with guilt. How had she not seen the dog sooner? It had saved her son, but at what cost? The world snapped back into focus as people rushed out of their cars, some running toward Mark, others toward the dog. Lisa's attention shifted back to the Labrador. A man crouched beside it, his hand shaking as he checked the dog for signs of life. Lisa barely registered the movement, still clutching her son tightly. She needed to breathe, to focus on Mark, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the dog. Is he okay?" Someone asked from behind her. Lisa could barely speak, but she nodded, her voice breaking as she replied, I don't know. Please, help him." The police arrived soon after, as did an ambulance. They helped her gather her thoughts, reassuring her that everything would be okay. But she couldn't focus on anything but the Labrador. The animal had saved her son from certain disaster, and yet it lay there, struggling to breathe, its body bruised and battered from the impact. She held Mark close, watching as the dog was gently moved to the side of the road. Her heart broke for the creature who had risked its life for her child, and she silently prayed for its survival. This was no ordinary rescue. This dog had gone beyond instinct. It had acted out of pure courage. The Labrador was carefully loaded into the back of a car, and Lisa's heart continued to race. But now there was something more, a sense of awe. The events that had just unfolded in front of her would change her life forever. Her son had been saved, and in the process, she had witnessed an act of heroism unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was a moment that would stay with her, forever etched in her memory. And little did she know, the journey was far from over. A hero's return. The following moments felt like a blur. Lisa sat on the curb, still holding Mark close to her chest, trying to calm her frantic heartbeat. The sound of sirens filled the air as the ambulance arrived, and people surrounded her, asking questions and offering comfort. But Lisa's mind was not fully present in those moments. She was caught in a whirlwind of gratitude, fear, and awe. Mark was shaken, but unharmed. He clung to her, his small body trembling, but the comfort of his mother's arms was enough to soothe him. He was safe. She could breathe again. But as the chaos of the situation began to settle, Lisa's thoughts once again turned to the dog, the white Labrador that had saved her son's life. She couldn't help but keep glancing toward the side of the road, where the dog had been rushed to by the paramedics. The scene still felt surreal. The dog had pushed Mark out of harm's way, absorbing the impact of the speeding car in the process. Lisa couldn't shake the image of the dog lying motionless on the asphalt, and a surge of emotion overwhelmed her. She had seen the dog's body flinch before the impact, its deep breaths shallow, but the way it had shielded Mark without a second thought. There was no other way to describe it but selflessness. The dog had acted with purpose, with love, as though it understood exactly what was at stake. As the paramedics continued to attend to Mark and the other bystanders, Lisa's thoughts kept drifting back to the Labrador. She needed to know if the dog was okay. She had to thank it, somehow. Without the dog, she could have lost everything. Her son, her world. Hours passed, and Lisa finally found herself in the waiting room of the emergency vet clinic. Mark had been thoroughly checked out. Thankfully, no injuries, and the shock was starting to wear off, but her thoughts still clung to the Labrador. She asked the receptionist about the dog, and the moment the words left her mouth, the woman's face softened. "He's alive," the receptionist said with a relieved smile. "The dog's going to be okay. He's in critical condition, but he's strong." Lisa exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She couldn't stop the tears that welled up in her eyes. The dog, who had risked its life without hesitation, was alive, and there was still a chance for recovery. As she sat in the waiting room, time seemed to stretch endlessly. She could hardly sit still, her mind spinning with thoughts of how to repay the dog, how to show her gratitude for the life it had saved. She had no idea where the dog had come from, but she had the growing sense that fate had played its part that day. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor appeared in the doorway. "We've done everything we can," the vet said. "He's a fighter. He's stable now, and with some rest and care, he'll make it through. He's a real hero." Lisa's heart swelled with relief and admiration. "Can I see him?" The vet nodded, and Lisa stood up, feeling a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. She followed the doctor to the back of the clinic, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. They reached a quiet room where the white Labrador lay, resting on a soft bed, his breathing still shallow but steady. The sight of him hit her like a wave. He was bruised and battered, his fur matted with dirt and blood, but there was a certain calm about him now. He lay on his side, his eyes half closed, yet somehow still alert. Despite the pain he must have been in, there was a gentle peace about him that struck Lisa deeply. She knelt beside the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her words trembling as tears filled her eyes. "You saved him. You saved my baby." The Labrador's eyes flickered toward her, and for a moment, their gazes locked. It was as if he understood her gratitude, understood the depth of what he had done. Lisa reached out and gently stroked his head, her fingers trembling against his fur. "You're a hero," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The dog let out a soft sigh and nudged his head into her hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. The connection between them was undeniable. A bond had been formed in that instant when the dog had risked everything for her son. It was a bond forged in heroism, in loyalty, in love. Days passed, and the dog, whom the vet had named Max in honor of his strength, began to recover. Lisa visited him every day, bringing him food, water, and the comfort of her presence. And every time, she was met with that same quiet gratitude in his eyes. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. The dog had saved her son's life, and in return, she promised to give him the life he deserved. Eventually, the day came when the vet declared Max fit enough to leave the clinic. Lisa knew that she couldn't let him go, not now. He had already become part of their family. She adopted Max and brought him home, where he became not only a cherished family member, but a constant reminder of the incredible bond between humans and animals. Mark, now more than ever, had a new hero in his life, a hero who had protected him when no one else could. Max no longer roamed the streets as a stray. He had found a home, a family, and his loyalty, once shown in that fateful moment on the highway, was now returned in the form of love, care, and security. Months later, Mark would play with Max in the backyard, rolling his little ball across the grass, while the Labrador, once a stray, now lay contentedly by his side, guarding him with the same dedication that had saved him that day. The story of how a dog saved a child and found a family became a tale of inspiration, a reminder that heroes can come in the most unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most selfless acts of kindness are the ones that change the course of our lives forever. Lisa never forgot the day the world had stopped for a moment, when a Labrador had stepped in front of danger, without hesitation, to save her son. And she knew, without a doubt, that the bond they had forged was a gift they would cherish forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.